All right, so another welcome. And as I was just explaining, I'm going to just talk a little bit about this topic and record the part that is being talked about. And then as we get into more sharing people's specific stories and journeys, I'll turn off the recording so that we can feel that level of comfort. So welcome to the Unschooling School Café. This happens every 2 Tuesdays at noon for about an hour. And the idea is to give an opportunity to talk about unschooling, as in like self-directed learning and being in control of your own learning, and what it might look like in a school context. So kind of blending those ideas, looking at flexibilities, looking at sabbaticals, looking at all kinds of options that start to come to the table when we take this notion of school doesn't have to be following a conveyor belt through. You know, what does it look like when you decide to make school your own? So I host this because I've been involved with Unschooling School for a time, and my own work as an education consultant is, of course, relevant to this. I mostly support people who are on some kind of a self-directed journey around their education, and often that means that they've had experiences or are still having experiences in school which are not happy for them, you know, which are traumatic or anxiety provoking or, you know, difficult in one way or another. So we really are looking at who are you and what does education mean for you, and how can this show up in your life, be it in school or outside of school. So today's topic, I called it Explore the Unschooling School Approach to High School. And so what I mean by that is this idea of, if we kind of come back to ourselves, to our heart, or what one of my clients recently called the anchor of who you are, and you think about what are your intentions, what are your choices, and if part of that choice means you're going to be in school for a time or for a while, what are your goals then? What are you hoping to get out of that experience? How do we look at it with that kind of a lens? So my goal today was for people to ask questions that they have, share experiences they might have, and just brainstorm together. You know, we always have more ideas when we can come together. So when I'm helping somebody to think something like this through, or when I'm talking to people who are in a school and helping them to see this approach, one of the first things I'll always talk about is, well, what is working for a child or a teen in their school context? You know, for my daughter, for example, she loves seeing her friends every day. That was seeing friends every day, all day, was a huge piece for her. And that was often where our conversation needed to start. And she was in school for much more of her childhood than her brother, who had different priorities and opted to not be in school for much of his childhood and teen years. So what's working? Are there some teachers that you really connect to? Are there some subjects that you really enjoy at school? Like maybe art. There's a fantastic art room with all kinds of supplies that you just don't have in the corner of your bedroom where you try to do your art at home, or maybe it's science labs. So really just going through and making a list of what are the things that work about school. And then looking at the other side of the coin. So what are the things that aren't working so well? But always in the context of what would be needed to improve those things. You know, often people will say things like, school just takes too much time. Like, I'm there all day, and then I have to come home and do homework. Like, no, I don't want to do that. So that's an example of something that's not working. And then what would be the way of improving it? Well, not having to come home and do homework. So just get all of those types of ideas down. So other ideas like that come up often that I hear are, it's not only is the school day too long, but it takes too much of the year, or it takes too much of the week. You know, I don't want to be there 5 days a week. I wouldn't mind if it was only 3 days. Well, so let's write it down. School takes too many days in the week. What are the options around flexible attendance? School has too many tests. We're constantly being evaluated. We never get to just learn. Everything we do is getting evaluated in some way. That creates a lot of stress and anxiety for many of us. And for those of us who don't get stressed or anxious about tests, even at that, it means that you're never getting to just like really wallow in learning and exploring and like getting into the meat of something. because you're always wondering what's going to be on the test, because there's a test every week or 2 weeks or whatever it is. So then we start looking at, is it possible to remove some of the marking for this child? And that's kind of a crazy concept, but it is a concept that I've seen happen in schools where, that child is getting non-evaluated on some tests, and they're making the choice to have other tests worth more of their mark. But that way they take off this frequent pressure and have it less frequent. And that's a flexibility that I've seen found in some settings. Another thing that can really be a challenge for kids in school is that feeling of, if it's bullying or there's too much noise or the lights are too bright, so it's like a physiological response of, I just can't be in this room right now. And it's actually more common than we would think, because a lot of us would feel it, but then just kind of push it away. And in that instance, we're looking at things like, well, what are safe spaces in the school? Who's a safe adult that you might be able to go to? Is there a way that you can just leave when that happens? So those are things, again, that I've seen happen a lot, where there's a dedicated person. It might be a guidance counselor, or it might be a resource person of some kind, or even another teacher. And the student knows that they can just give some kind of signal, and away they go to go and see that person and help themselves get anchored or rooted again. And then a wild and crazy thought is a gap year or a sabbatical. And sometimes that's what people who are homeschooling are actually feeling. It's like, well, for now, Sarah, you said this earlier as we were talking, like, kind of thought it might be school this year, but oh, it's not. Okay, well, let's see what that looks like. And this notion of, it doesn't have to be a decision of forever. If you decide to start high school, that doesn't mean you have to stay in high school till the end. If you decide to stop high school, that doesn't mean you have to stay away from high school until the end. School, like owning school, unschooling your school experience or unschooling your education, means getting to make choices like that. This year, I want to be in school. This year, I don't. And that's, a really simple question that obviously makes a big difference if you decide to take a year off. And it makes a big difference just because, hi Carol, welcome. It makes a big difference because you know that you have choices. So much of anxiety or challenges come from feeling stuck and from feeling like there are no options. So if we have a child or teen who understands that they don't have to stay in school, or they don't have to stay homeschooling, that they have agency and choices and their voice is valuable, then that in itself can shift things dramatically. A little bit less dramatic than sabbatical is the idea of taking a day off a week, or maybe it's a week off per month, or maybe it's taking a 2-month Christmas holiday, or maybe it's being able to take a mental health day whenever you feel like it as a teen, not having to say, I think I've got a sore throat, not having to do that in order to stay home, but actually just saying, I'm staying home today. Again, that gives that validation to that person owning their learning experience, which strips away the layers of stress and makes it easier to find what works for you and where. Again, this specifically in the school context, another idea that I've seen make a big difference for some kids is working with the school to make sure that a child's schedule has a friend in every class. So that, because in high school, we're often changing classes every period, and that can be really stressful. I remember that being really stressful. And if you know that you're always going to have a friend, all of a sudden, there's somebody that you'll be able to study with, somebody you'll be able to sit beside. It's a small thing that if a school can be convinced to work with the family to ensure that, it can actually make a huge difference. One of the other things that I've seen happen to bring flexibility into a high school experience is dropping some classes at school and doing online instead, so that your time that you spend at school isn't all about school academic subjects, but you know that some of those subjects you're actually taking care of on your own. So if you wind up with spare time at school and you're able to be in the library, you might be working on that class that you're doing online through whatever organization, and you own it. So you don't have like 8 classes that are all happening in a row in the same school setting. You can make more choices for some of those classes. I will just note that some school areas, for example, I'm in Quebec, and in Quebec, the mantra is all students must be full-time, which means that it's near impossible to drop a class at school and do it outside of school. But we have found flexibility within that. So sometimes there's some kind of medical reason that you can use. It's not easy, but it has been done. So what I would say there, that kind of leads me into the next point, which is any kind of change or unusual way of involving yourself with school that you're hoping to do is almost always best put forward by somebody in the system who gets it. So if you find that like guidance counselor that you see at the parent-teacher night who just seems kind of cool and you have like just a bit of a good vibe from them, go talk to them. That might wind up being the person who is your child and your contact point to help figure out, well, where are the flexibilities and how can we make this work for everyone? And that is so important for many reasons, but one of them is something that I think we don't often think about. And I know I've been guilty of this. When your mama bear is front and center because your child is struggling in some way, and you can see a solution, it's easy to kind of go in really like, well, you just have to like it's easy to go in really hard and I really want you to do this for my child because my child needs it. But each one of those people who are in that system, that school setting, is there because they love kids. They've all found themselves there for some version of that. And they're doing their very best to do their job. And so, as is so often the case in the world, if we can truly understand what their needs are and what their limits are and what forces are at play on them, creating pressure for them, we can understand that and work within that when we're making our requests. That's almost always going to have better results than just going like, my kid needs this, and then kind of coming up like that. And that's where that idea of somebody that you are able to make a connection to within the school can help you understand that. They can advocate for your child and they can advocate for the teachers to you so that you can actually understand why that thing that seems perfectly easy and logical actually can't happen. And let's look for something else. So that's a really, really important point, is to remember the humanity that is in the system that you're seeking to find some flexibility within. Then the last thing I'll sort of say about all of this is, from a parent's perspective, even from a teacher's perspective, sometimes we can look at a child's situation, a teen situation, and say, oh yeah, like if we just, take you out of a science class and then make it so you don't have to do the assignments in English class, I can see that's going to bring your stress level down. Let's do that. It'll all be good. But the child or teen will quite often have the reaction, I don't want to be different. Or it's not fair that I wouldn't have to do assignments and everybody else would. Because most people in school, we see it as being like you're there and then it's kind of done to you. You have to do assignments and do tests. And if one person gets to not do them, then that's not fair. And that's a really, really, really tricky one to deal with. I don't think there's a blanket answer to that because, of course, every situation is different. Some of the things I've seen help is if there's a specific medical situation, like, for example, a concussion, well, you know, the reason that you're getting this special treatment is to help your brain heal. Like that's the kind of thing that can help. Because, you know, if your leg was broken, you would be getting the special treatment of not running laps in gym class because your leg is broken. And here you have a different situation that requires a different treatment. So that's one thing that can sometimes help us to link it to some kind of a special medical situation. Sometimes, depending on the child, sometimes it can be, well, you know, maybe you're going to be a trailblazer. Like, don't you wish for all of your friends that they could have the option not to have to do all of this? You're being offered this chance. And if this works out well, maybe the next 3 people who make this request will find it easier. So you might actually be leading the way for your friends or future generations. That definitely doesn't resonate with every child or teen, but for some it might. And then there's, well, how can we allow you to have this individualized approach in such a way that your peers aren't aware of it? That's another thing. And maybe that means that, you know, if they're only having every second test marked, maybe they still do the other test, but it's just not being marked. Maybe the teacher, instead of handing out the tests that have been marked, you know, during class, so everybody says, what did you get? Maybe the teacher changes that policy and just hands them, you know, as the kids are walking out the door or whatever it is, so that it's easier to just disappear and not be in the conversation of what did you get. So there's little things like that, again, that can make a big difference. So where we started in these kind of lists of ideas and thoughts was with the idea that if we can be anchored in what is important to us as human beings when we're going through our education, then we can always come at it from that perspective. You know, and that comes down to things like, if I'm going through high school and I know that I'm going to be applying to university in a really competitive program, then my marks are important to that application. But if I know that I'm most likely going to go to university in a general arts degree, which isn't looking for people who are, you know, have 90s, then maybe my priorities right now are going to be to get, you know, 70s so that I can get into the program, but to also spend time on the things that I love to do, so that I'm not automatically always doing my best in my school context. Doing my best is a holistic concept of what is my best life. And school and marks can be part of it, but I know that I love spending time with my friends or babysitting or working at my job that makes me feel valued and good. So we don't always have to do our best in a school context. That's a huge one. And it comes back to that idea of what's most important for you right now. And it's actually a really interesting one to talk to teens about, because I had a huge conversation with one of the teens that I mentor. So with some of the clients I have, I work with them every week. And this girl has left school and, you know, is self-directed learning now. And we talked a lot about that idea of doing your best and how it's always stated in a school context, like always do your best. It'll be posters on the walls. And she was saying, like, it's exhausting to always do your best. Like, and she just said it so clearly. It's like, think about it, you know, from 9 till 3:30, 5 days a week, plus homework, you're always doing your best. You know, and if we try to think about what that looks like as an adult, to be always doing your best, it's crazy making. You know, we know that we go like this. We know that there are things that, you know, some nights for supper, we just put a frozen pizza in the oven, and other nights for supper, we create something from scratch, because we have to make choices on different days. And in schools, it's hard for kids to find opportunities to make a choice about how much effort they put into something. So it's hard for them to learn that and to feel that it's okay to do that. So we can give them that language. Oh, you've got a test coming up? Well, what's your goal for this test? Do you need to study till 3 in the morning? Or can you actually just pass it? So there's all these kind of mindset shifts that I think we can do, or even just using different language that helps start to think about it all differently. So I'm going to leave my blah, blah, blah part of it at that. As I said, I'll turn off the recording once we get into talking, into your stories and questions. But I wonder, before we turn off the recording, is there anybody who would like to add something in that would then also be available for others who might watch this later? No problem with that. All right, so what I'm going to do is stop the recording and then we can chat.